Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A warm welcome to you all, and especially to our distinguished guests and speakers for this session on agriculture and food security. My name is Lauren Razavi, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this session. A reminder that you can get involved in the summit using the hashtag Adaptation Summit and in the live chat on our website. Today we are going to talk about the need for climate-smart agriculture and food security in a world impacted by climate change. Each year, climate change brings more droughts, flooding, and extreme weather events. This is already taking a severe toll on farmers, especially in low and middle-income countries. There are places in the world where people spend more than half of their income on food. In these poorer communities, food prices could rise by 20% or more, pushing people further into poverty. This presents major setbacks in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our session today touches upon all aspects of climate-resilient agriculture, from research, innovation, and climate finance to integrated value chains and agroecology. We begin with a video highlighting the critical role of farmers in food systems.
Climate change is wreaking havoc on the lives and livelihoods of the world's most vulnerable.
Global hunger is on the rise. Rural communities and farmers around the world are struggling to produce enough good food. And climate change is making this even worse.
Governments have the power to choose what to fund, and we, the people, have the power to prioritize what matters.
Global citizens have taken action by signing petitions, writing letters, and tweeting at world leaders to step up the world's most vulnerable.
Investing in farmers equals investments in food security, increased yields, incomes, more jobs, and ultimately lifting communities out of extreme poverty.
In an era of climate change, pandemic, and biodiversity loss, small and medium-sized farms and smallholder farmers are needed more than ever to end rising hunger and make food systems sustainable and resilient.
Let's start now.
Now I would like to welcome our two hosts for this session. The first is Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who is President of AGRA and Special Envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit. She joins us live from Nairobi in Kenya. Dr. Kalibata, welcome and thank you for being here. To start us off, can you explain why climate-resilient agriculture is important in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Lorraine, and thank you for those introductory remarks. I'm very happy to be here with you today. First, as a commissioner of the GCA, given the amount of work that has gone into this, I'm very proud of what you all have done. As special envoy of the Food Systems Summit, but also as the leader of an African organization that is working with smallholder farmers every day, trying to make sense out of their livelihoods from the agriculture sector. I want to congratulate the PM, the Prime Minister, for really mobilizing the rest of the world to this very important cause. As you've said, Lorraine, raise. And even before COVID-19 happened, we were having increases in hunger over a period of 5 years. 60 million people have gone hungry in the last 5 years alone. But we now know that COVID-19 has made it even more difficult for these people. So our priorities right now must be three. One, to really work very hard to build and support the 570 million smallholder farmers that depend on agriculture for a livelihood, but also that provide 60% of the food that we eat. Two, to build resilience of food systems. Our food systems are right now very fragile, and we need them, not just for the sustenance of humanity, but to ensure that our planet continues. Three, we need to ensure that SDG 1 and SDG 2, which is our progress towards zero hunger, but also our progress around poverty, do not continue to undermine livelihoods for the most vulnerable among us, especially women and children. Now, the imperative, like you said, is very clear. Yesterday, one leader from one leader to another, it was very clear that everybody believes that investing in resilience is a huge payoff. In fact, one of the leaders said that resilience has the ability to pay 6 times better than investing supporting people after damage, and rebuilding their livelihoods. So the imperative has never been clear, especially now that we are dealing with millions of people that have fallen out of their food security brackets. I would like to suggest 4 ideas that I see based on the institution that I work in, AGRA, some of the things we've learned over the years. Across all the 18 countries we are working in, we built a partnership with universities, national research systems, and institutions in private sector to take to take new crop varieties coming out of the CGIR to ensure that farmers get them as soon as they are out. 50% of the varieties that are grown in Kenya, for example, are climate smart. And this has happened in the last 3 years alone, ensuring that farmers have access to varieties that mature faster, that need less water, but also are not easily damaged by pests. Across 8 countries, we have doubled down on extension, building partnerships that engage young people, local businesses, to build an ecosystem around farmers that ensures that farmers have access to knowledge, technology, and information on climate issues, insurance, and on markets. This has been given a kick, I might say, by the whole investment that is happening in digitization. So we see farmers, for example, because of COVID, knowing drop-offs for seed and times of pickup so that we can manage social distancing and minimize exposure to COVID. So the same channel is being used to provide for farmers, and farmers really know what to do under the current circumstances. We also now, looking at the other program here, is we are looking at building resilience of systems, the lands that farmers use. We have seen that farmers, because of climate change, are increasingly using more land than they would have because they are producing less from the land they use. In fact, 30% of all production, for example, on the African continent, is coming from using more land. For these farmers, the ability to have good seed, good fertilizers, now we talk about blends of fertilizers that don't damage the environment, good agronomic practices, is something that they are very happy to do once they're introduced to these technologies, and we are seeing it across the board. And for these farmers, they are actually even willing to plant and rehabilitate degraded land because they don't need to do more land. They can produce less with what they have. But one of the most important lessons that I've seen around this that I would like to share with you all is just how much farmers are willing to protect land when they own it. So the whole issue of land ownership and the ability of farmers to invest in land and to protect their land for future generations is something that is inherent in what they do, but they have to have a good reason. And this takes me to my last point, where we actually, as AGRA now, work to support governments to ensure that we are building an ecosystem of policies that are supporting all the things that are needed to move the agricultural sector forward, including better resilience, better farming practices, and a conducive environment for the private sector. So you see, from my institutional perspective and from where I sit, climate resilience and adaptation to climate change is a solvable problem. I end on a point on a trip I took to the North Pole at the beginning of last year, when I was representing the Secretary General, when countries and governments were depositing their seeds for the year. I was told that in that part of the world, climate change was first noticed in 1920. 100 years later, in 2020, we saw that they experienced the worst climate ever that actually will probably make life in that part of the world impossible. It means that we've been passing on the climate bug down to generations for the last 5 to 6 generations. We can do better. We can definitely do better. We need to start thinking about taking responsibility, number one, for the damage that climate has caused. That's why we're having this conversation around climate resilience and adaptation. And I'm very glad that we are talking and concerned about this problem. But we also need to stop climate change. We cannot continue passing it on to the next generation. The opportunity is now, and the time is now. And for me, this is not just, it is a race to zero, and we need to make it a race to zero, as well as it is a race to resilience. So we have two twin problems that we must solve. Our generation has the biggest opportunity of a lifetime. We have the Food Systems Summit right now going on. We have the COP26 at the end of this year. We have the Biodiversity COP happening this year. We have so many things. We actually call this year the super year of engaging around climate change and doing the right thing for climate change. Community as a journey, make sure that we stop in its tracks. Very happy to be hosting this meeting and to listen to all the conversations that are going to happen, but also the opportunities that we'll be discussing that we can take to people. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalibata, for that detailed introduction. Our second host for today's session is Roger Voorhees of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He is president of the Foundation's Global Growth and Opportunity Division. A warm welcome to Mr. Voorhees.
Dr. Kalibata is providing remarkable leadership for smallholder farmers in Africa and for the coalition she's building for the Food Systems Summit. I know we would all like to be together in person, but I'd like to thank the government of the Netherlands for making this virtual summit happen. I've had the privilege of working alongside our co-chair, Bill Gates, with the Global Commission for Adaptation for the last 2 years. The Commission has built a strong case for investing in adaptation. Even as we work to reduce emissions, we need to mount a massive effort to build resilience in vulnerable communities. The Commission has shown us that if we do so, it will bring enormous economic, social, and environmental benefits. That's especially true for investments focused on smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Their farms may be small, yet in these regions they supply about 80% of the food. Also, smallholder farming is the main source of income for about 1 billion people, and many of those farmers are women. Climate change is already having a big impact on their crops and livestock. It's one of the 3 big C's, along with conflict and now COVID-19, that are causing hunger to rise after years of declining, and it's likely to get worse. There are estimates that in the next 30 years, if we do nothing to help farmers adapt, climate change could reduce crop yields around the world up to 30%. Smallholder producers deserve much more support to cope with climate change. But right now, according to the OECD, only about 7% of total concessional development finance for climate goes to agriculture. Today, around the world, we are focused on ending the pandemic and engaging in the hard work of recovery. Investing in adaptation will be critical to that recovery, especially in regions where agriculture remains the dominant economic activity. If we are truly committed to pandemic recovery, then we should be committed to developing more sustainable, resilient, climate-smart food systems. There are a few key elements for making that happen. For example, we must protect grant financing and overseas development assistance. These instruments are very effective for rapidly developing and deploying tools and technology as global public goods. We must also keep one eye on the present and another eye on the future. We need to address the climate stress that is hitting communities right now, but with systems and assets that can be useful for decades. Investing in adaptation is also an opportunity to build a greener, more sustainable approach to food production. Adaptation is often about keeping your soil healthy, your water demands low, and diversifying food production. We can only increase the options available in all of these areas by investing in agricultural research and innovation. Developing an R&D roadmap for resilience would be a great way to generate the global partnerships we need to accelerate action on climate adaptation. So it's good to see the United Kingdom is leading this effort in advance of COP26 to develop a strong focus on scaling up financing for agricultural research. We also need to take advantage of the CGIAR's vast network of agriculture research centers and their partners in national agricultural research institutions. Their work has a very strong connection to smallholder farmers. We know that for every dollar invested in the CGIAR, it generates $10 in benefits for low-income countries. But as Bill Gates said earlier, we need to deliver innovative solutions at the speed of climate change, which means doubling the CG's budget from about $1 billion to $2 billion a year. That seems like a lot, and it is. But in a world that has allocated about $12 trillion to post-pandemic stimulus programs so far, it's a small price to pay for resilient, climate-proof food systems. The Global Commission on Adaptation and its partners at the World Resources Institute and the Global Center on Adaptation deserve credit for moving adaptation from the margins to the mainstream of the climate agenda. I look forward to seeing the intervention showcased today translated into practical solutions for smallholder farmers. That includes initiatives like the Digital Blueprint for developing advisory services that have a strong climate focus. The goal is to end the poverty of information that prevents farmers from earning a good income from their work. I hope governments and the GCA partners will support efforts to implement it. Thanks to all participating in this session. I look forward to working together in the coming year.
My thanks to Mr. Voorhees for those opening remarks. Now it's time for our first fireside chat. I'm delighted to introduce this conversation between Idris and Sabrina Elba and Norway's Minister of International Development, Dag Inge Ulstein. They will discuss the state of agriculture today and the need to scale up our joint action efforts.
Minister Ulstein, thank you so much for joining us, and we are really delighted to have your company today at the Climate Adaptation Summit. Thank you so much.
Rising hunger, more and more people on the front lines of climate change. There has never been a more important time to step up, and a look at how we need to shift our approach is imperative right now. I want to ask you, in your words, why are food systems the solution, and what do all of us need to do to make our systems more equitable and fair?
Well, thank you. The combination of climate change, COVID-19, and the socioeconomic downturn, as I said, is really devastating, in particular on food security. That was something that was going the wrong way before the pandemic, and it's just increased. So, as you know, hunger has been on the rise since, isn't it 2014? It's about 690 million people who do not have enough to eat and are suffering. So again, access to sufficient, safe and healthy food is so fundamental for people's lives. We cannot have good education, we cannot have good health and economic development without that. So again, the world needs to stop the negative trend on hunger. The world's food system must be changed. As you said, Norway has this action plan on sustainable food systems to guide our foreign policy and development cooperation. And we support more than 50 different programs now, and programs and projects to assist developing countries in providing enough healthy and safe food for their own population.
Why is it important that countries also work together for issues that essentially do not affect their borders? And especially why now?
There is no challenge that is more global than climate change. And it can only be solved globally through international cooperation. And I think the climate change and pandemics are overwhelming proof of our interdependence of countries and citizens from every corner of the world sitting in one boat, just as a picture. Because nobody is safe from the virus until everybody is safe, and the same applies to climate change. So the Paris Agreement established three main objectives. And one is that climate change must be combated in a way that does not threaten food production. And this is really, really important. The world must reduce global emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change at the same time as we increase food production to combat hunger. And you told that already, biodiversity must be protected. Protecting nature while producing more efficiently will improve food security, and it's the nature-based solution must be the answer to this. So Norway's new strategy on climate adaptation and resilience We'll focus on concrete solutions to reduce hunger, and we will spread climate adaptive knowledge and technologies for poor small-scale farmers and fishermen, as I mentioned. It's really devastating that these important topics won't kind of reach the news, the media these days because of the pandemic and because of everything else going on, because this hasn't stopped.
And rightfully so, people are looking at the COVID crisis as the most immediate thing, but we just need to remember that there's all these issues going on behind the scenes that are still continuing on, and hunger and climate change are two massive ones. We spoke and had a conversation with another leader in the climate and agriculture space, President Macron, last week, and he made an ambitious pledge, and he stepped up in a significant way to support rural smallholder farmers. Take a look at this clip.
I can tell you, and you can make it publicly, and we will make it publicly, but we will increase our commitment. We will increase by 50%.
But look, we also know and are grateful of the incredible work that Norway has done in championing this role, and the work that Norway has done for IFAD particularly. I want to ask you what steps you might be taking to support the continuation of this work in 2021.
One of our main priorities is to fight hunger, and therefore IFAD's mandate lies very close to my and our hearts. And also the IFAD's ambition to double its impact by 2030 is so timely and needed. And IFAD is able to make a big difference for poor small-scale farmers in the most vulnerable countries also. And Norway will really increase our contribution to IFAD significantly. And I think that's so important because we really want to reach those who are furthest behind. And there is no other kind of vehicle that has that impact in a way that IFAD actually have. And from the Norwegian side, we spend 1% of our gross national income on development cooperation, and our overall objective is to fight poverty, to save lives, and to alleviate suffering. And ending hunger is an extremely important goal. So we will really stepping up, and we will increase our contributions to IFAD significantly. So I really look forward to strengthen that partnership and work together with you and to the IFAD team also in the days, weeks and months ahead of us.
Minister Olstein, thank you.
You're warm welcome.
As Dr. Kalibata and Mr. Voorhees discussed earlier, climate resilient agriculture touches upon a variety of important areas. Now we will take a look at them in more detail. I'd like to hand over to Wanjira Maathai, who is calling in live from Nairobi, Kenya. Wanjira, could you begin by introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. Very interesting remarks there from all of them. My name is Wanjira Maathai, and I am Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. Delighted to be here today to share and to facilitate this discussion on the demand-driven research for development that actually meets the climate challenge. This session will take cognizance of the fact that agriculture and food systems vulnerability is deeply affected by climate change, and it sets out pathways for innovation systems that can transform adaptation action in the center, which we actually have no choice. I think Agnes said it really well. We have no choice. We must do it. So to introduce and discuss this link between climate change and land use, I'm delighted and honored to share this message from Carola Schouten. She's the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality of the Netherlands.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 6 years ago, the world came together in Paris to agree on the world's climate targets. All countries pledged to agree on the reverse of global warming. Nature has been sending us emergency signals. Weather extremes occur more often and weather patterns are changing. It has become clear that climate evolutions relate to human activity. It is now time for us, as a global community, to act. And food systems are key in climate action. We need to be able to combine food security for all people, a resilient food system, and our climate targets. For that to happen, food systems need to become more adaptive. And I'm well aware that this is easier said than done. Dilemmas persist. The land and agricultural sector emits around 25% of all of our greenhouse gases. But the agricultural sector is also the first sector to be hit by climate change. The production of food is at risk. And at the same time, farmers' communities are affected, and farmers risk to be left without income. There are multiple ways out of this dilemma. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. We need know-how, science and innovative technologies. It's vital that our policies are based on science. And companies and people should be inspired to reduce climate footprints, to better respect natural resources, to prevent food from being wasted and lost after harvest. But most important, we have to do this together. We need the private sector, knowledge institutions, governments, and societal organizations for coordinated action. And the Netherlands has a lot of know-how and expertise to share, and we are committed to be part of the solutions. As of today, the United Kingdom and the CEG network run a campaign for tailored systems of innovation and research to increase climate action. And I highly welcome and support it and hope for your active involvement. The year 2021 has just begun, and it's time to make our ideas work for farmers, nature, climate, and society as a whole. The importance of the Climate Adaptation Summit is to accelerate action and drive systemic change. Later this year, the Food Systems Summit, the United Nations Biodiversity Summit, and the United Nations Climate Summit are stepping stones for us to deliver on our objectives. The time is right to act.
Now pleased to introduce the message from the Right Honourable Lord Goldsmith of Richmond Park, the Minister for Pacific and the Environment at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Wanjira, and thanks to the Netherlands and the Global Commission on Adaptation. Hunger has been rising since 2014, and because of COVID-19, it's risen still further to threaten almost 1 billion people. And it might be tempting to look at the last 40 years or so where we miraculously tripled food production, and to then imagine we can continue doing so, and not only provide for those currently hungry, but also accommodate a predicted 9 billion people by 2030. But we know that we cannot, not without a significant shift in the way we do things. Simply, if we continue to produce and consume food in the way that we've been doing for the past few decades, there will be a terrible price to pay. Now, already the damage we've done to the natural world is catastrophic, and fundamentally, it's unsustainable. Populations of key species have declined by more than 2/3 since the 1970s. 2 out of 5 plant species now face extinction. The ocean is being denuded of life. We're destroying forests at a rate of 30 football pitches each minute. In a vicious cycle, agriculture is now the second biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, which is further undermining global food security. Globally, more than half of the agricultural land we use is now degraded, and it's estimated that the diminishing yields will hit 500 million small farms hardest. So undoubtedly, we need a very radical shift. Now, part of that will involve innovation and technology. At the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019, we launched the Just Rural Transition to help get policy and investment behind the critical shift towards more productive, profitable, and sustainable land use around the world. And as presidents of the next COP, the UK is launching the Transforming Agricultural Innovation campaign to increase investment in research to ensure that public money backs innovation that supports climate, nature, and people, and to develop new models, approaches, and partnerships. We'll be scaling up and sharing what works, like extraordinary plant science at Kew Gardens in London, securing staple foods for the future, solar-powered cold chain technology, keeping food and vaccines fresh, and international research and development through CGIAR that has prevented the clearing of an area bigger than our entire country. But investing in innovation is only part of what is needed, and we shouldn't pin all our hopes on technology. As part of our COP presidency, we want to build global coalitions of countries committed not only to cleaning up agricultural supply chains, specifically breaking the link between commodity production and deforestation, but also to rethinking agricultural policies and incentives. Every year, the top 50 food-producing countries, for instance, pour $700 billion for support for often destructive land use. That's around 4 times the world's aid budgets combined. And coincidentally, it's also roughly what scientists estimate we're going to need to spend to reverse environmental destruction and to help nature recover. So imagine the impact if even part of this public support could be redirected to help farmers transition to climate-friendly and nature-positive land management. With the Food Systems Summit in sight, we have a chance, indeed a duty, to begin that process now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Goldsmith, for those full remarks, and especially for painting that picture of what a radical shift will have to look like. Very exciting to see the UK's leadership on this issue, and particularly in putting people, justice, and nature, as you sit there at the end, at the very center of your campaign. All too often, constituencies that are marginalized or ignored. But by putting people together in fighting this crisis, we are well on our way to more prosperous and resilient future. Thank you very much. Next, I'm delighted to present a message from Claudia Sadoff, the CGIAR Managing Director for Research, Delivery and Impact, on the future of her organization and an ambitious proposal to tackle many of the areas already mentioned today.
Thank you, Wanjira, and good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone joining. I'm pleased to represent CGIAR on this distinguished panel. For those of you who don't know CGIAR, we are the world's largest agricultural research partnership with 10,000 staff working in more than 70 countries. We've collaborated with thousands of partners around the world to deliver impacts for more than 50 years, helping to lift hundreds of millions of people out of hunger and poverty and supporting small-scale food producers and consumers. CGIAR wholeheartedly supports the focus on climate adaptation for this summit hosted by the Netherlands, and would also like to echo the Right Honourable Lord Goldsmith's sentiment about the importance of nature-based solutions in solving 21st century challenges. This panel comes at an opportune time for CGIAR as we mark our 50th anniversary and embark on a new 10-year strategy that will see all of our work anchored in addressing the climate crisis. The reason for this new approach is simple. The climate crisis is at the forefront of threats to our ability to provide proper nutrition for all people, while staying within environmental limits. This is especially true for the small-scale farmers, fishers, and pastoralists that CGIAR works with. These groups provide more than half the world's food, yet most are terribly underprepared to adapt to the impacts of climate change, including droughts and floods, extreme temperatures and weather, and pests and disease. And it's estimated they receive only 1.7% of all climate finance. As the Minister of International Development of Norway rightly pointed out earlier, now is the time to scale up joint action. For our part, CGIAR intends to contribute to this transformation by building on its track record in plant and animal sciences, and to pursue impacts beyond the farm gate into broader landscapes and food systems. And to be clear, this is not an incremental shift. It is a fundamental transformation that acknowledges that our food production is situated inextricably within our waterways, our natural habitats, and the climate itself. And a recognition that those producing our food are stewards of this full landscape at the same time that they depend upon it for their livelihoods. We congratulate the UK in launching its Transforming Agricultural Innovation for Climate, Nature and People in the COP26 Sustainable Agriculture Campaign, as it fundamentally recognizes that it is not a trade-off between ecosystems and food production, but rather that we must work in concert to provide healthy, nutritious, and sustainable food for all. To rise to this challenge, CGIAR is in the process of further integrating its network of research centers around the world so that we can tackle these interconnected challenges more systematically, more efficiently, and more collaboratively, with an even broader set of partners. What does this mean in practice? Let me give you 2 examples. CGIAR's 2-degree initiative for food and agriculture, which draws on our global network of gene banks, field sites and partnerships, and focuses them on climate change to help hundreds of millions of small-scale producers, many of them women, youth, and other marginalized persons, to adapt their farming systems, livelihoods, and landscapes to a changing climate, to make them more resilient to climate-related changes and shocks. And also CGIAR's Crops to End Hunger initiative that will, among other things, accelerate and modernize the development, delivery, and wide-scale use of new climate-smart crop varieties to provide resilience to pests, diseases, and new environmental challenges arising from climate change. Projections show that 2-degree warming will result in an additional 540 to 590 million people undernourished globally by 2050. We have time to avert this outcome if we act urgently and together now. Thank you, and back to Wanjira.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much, Claudia. And we need CGIAR in this critical year of action. And I must add that we at WRI are also delighted to support the CGIAR in this very exciting process. And we're proud to support CGIAR in hosting over 50 listening sessions around the world last year to develop a demand-driven research agenda on climate change. And I'm looking forward to the proceedings from these listening sessions, which can be found now on WRI's website, wri.org. And we have one final message. Allow me to welcome the final message of this topic from Martijn van der Kop, Global Director for the Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank.
I'm delighted to be joining the Agriculture and Food Security segment at the Climate Adaptation Summit today. I will give you a quick overview of how the World Bank is responding to the needs of farmers facing climate change in the countries where we work. It goes without saying that adaptation is critical to protect yields and the types of productivity gains that are urgently needed in poor countries. We won't be able to meet increasing food demand and reduce the footprints of agricultural natural resources without climate-proofing agriculture practices. At the World Bank, adaptation is critical to our operations. In 2020, we provided over $1.6 billion in financing for climate adaptation and mitigation in agriculture and food systems. We screen all projects for climate risk, and we have developed a track record of successful climate-smart operations around the world. Of course, the World Bank provides financing and technical assistance, but relies on third parties to bring cutting-edge research to our clients. That's why our partnership with CGIAR is so important. We rely on its programs to bring tried and tested climate-smart technologies and management methods, early warning systems, risk insurance, and other innovations to promote resilience and combat climate change. In this context, we are particularly proud to be fulfilling our pledge to step up support to CGIAR. In December, the board of the World Bank approved $60 million in additional financing over 3 years to accelerate the impacts of CGIAR climate research in Africa. The project will provide better access to climate information services and validated climate-smart agriculture technologies in 6 countries, Senegal, Ghana, Mali, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Zambia, to help farmers and livestock keepers better anticipate climate-related events and take preventative actions to safeguard their activities and to avoid catastrophic losses. Adapting agriculture to climate change is an existential challenge and an agenda that is much too large for countries and organizations to tackle on their own. The run-up to COP26 and the Food Systems Summit offer significant opportunities to dramatically ramp up support for nature-based solutions and to leverage public finance in smarter ways. We launched last year a new multi-donor trust fund called Food Systems 2030 that proposes to help countries maximize the impact of their public spending on agriculture and transform their food systems to include food security and reach their 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. By modernizing the policies and practices that govern agriculture and food and provide the right incentive to farmers and agribusiness, we could steer billions of dollars in private sector investments towards practices that work with nature. Adapting agriculture to climate change starts with science, but doesn't end there. Governments, businesses, partners and consumers urgently need to act to transform and climate-proof food systems, and the World Bank is very much committed to play a very active role in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. We are excited to hear about this new work that the bank is doing, supporting expanded research on agriculture and resilience and in food systems in Africa. Lauren, really crucial messages indeed from so many of our leaders. Agnes Kalibata opened this for us, President of AGRA, and she said we can do better. And quite frankly, of course we can. And actually we must do better because our lives depend on it, especially in this sector. We have all the tools, the knowledge, and the finances within our reach. All that actually begs the all-important question, why don't we act? Let's do it. Lauren, we must answer this question. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Wanjira, and I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks also to everybody who spoke as part of this session on the importance of innovation. I'm glad to say that we have a lot of people following along on the platform from all over the world, in fact. So we have people from India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Uganda, and a little bit closer by to where I am here in the Netherlands, Spain. Now, though, we're going to move on to climate finance. For this, I'd like to hand over to Monica Frula, who is CEO of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Monica Fröhler. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center. As you know, climate shocks are intensifying, and they already threaten the livelihoods of some of the world's poorest people. Many of them depend on smallholder agriculture. The International Fund for Agricultural Development is the leading multilateral organization. It is addressing how smallholder farmers adapt to climate change. I'm happy to welcome Gilbert Hongbo. He's the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I'm also happy to welcome Mr. Yannick Remark, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, and Dr. Sinead Walsh, Deputy Director General and Climate Envoy for the Irish Government, and Mr. Michael Sheldrick, the Chief Government Affairs Officer of Global Citizen. So, President Hongbo, could you start by explaining how climate change is affecting some of the 2 billion people who are either smallholder farmers or part of the smallholder farmers community? So what does that impact look like on the ground?
As you said, we do have 2 billion of smallholder farmers. We talk about 500 million households. They produce 80% of global production in Africa and some part of Asia. And globally, 50% of the total calorie consumed or needed is produced by those small-scale farmers. Essentially, the small-scale farmers, they practice rain-fed agriculture. So they are highly dependent on the weather condition. So you can imagine with the extreme weather condition that we are living today, they can be severely and mostly hit, whether you have flood or drought and etc. So they are very, very much exposed to climate change conditions.
The fund has an ambitious goal of raising $500 million in 5 years. Luckily, countries are already stepping up and contributing. Qatar, Germany, and Austria have made ambitious pledges. And Ireland is also coming to the table and has pledged €2 million. Dr. Walsh, the Irish government has long been an enthusiastic champion of the SDGs and has committed spending 0.7% of its GNI on international development. So how can supportive governments like Ireland build coalitions that are needed to actually create this structural change?
You know, we talk a lot in climate finance about how much is being spent, but we really need to talk a lot more about how that money is being spent. There's a very disgraceful figure that only 10% of climate finance reaches the local level, and I think this is a huge priority for Ireland, as for others, to really get this number up. And we are very engaged in the Life AR initiative. We're on the board. We're one of the supporters of that, the UK being the other donor involved at the moment. But we're really keen to encourage a coalition of donors to get behind the Life AR initiative, which aims to move that figure from 10% of climate finance reaching the local level to 70%. So I suppose that's also maybe an appeal to some listening today to really think about how we can support the coalitions that are locally driven, locally led, also thinking about adaptation finance, such as our own, as front-loading domestic flows thereafter.
Mr. Remark, what potential challenges do you see in supporting small-scale farmers in building the needed resilience, and how can these challenges be overcome?
Smallholder farmers face several barriers in terms of access to information, access to land, access to technologies, access to finance, access to markets, in order to increase the resilience to climate change. In terms of access to land, one of our concerns is to make sure that we target as much women farmers than men farmers. The women farmers account for over 40% of the farmers, but they are only 10 to 20% of the smallholders. So equal access to land is a critical priority. In terms of access to technologies, we focus on the solar-based irrigation, solar-based cold storage, climate resilient seeds, and all this new type of climate resilient farming practices.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Remark. Since 2020, global citizens around the world have taken over 145,000 actions in the fight against hunger. So, particularly in raising their voice of support for rural farmers and communities, they have shed a light on the immediate urgency that lies with this topic. Michael, I understand that you had a chance to visit Sierra Leone at the start of the campaign with IFAD. Could you tell us about how the role of individual action and campaigning is playing out, and what are the goals of Global Citizen in 2021 altogether?
Well, thanks, Monica. Look, since that trip pre-COVID to Sierra Leone, the world has changed in vast ways. And one of the most shocking ways it's changed is that now 160 million people are set to be pushed back into extreme poverty by the end of this year. So for our part at Global Citizen, this year in 2021, we'll be campaigning for governments, philanthropists, and the private sector to rally behind a 5-point plan for people and planet to recover better together. And as well as ending the pandemic for everyone, rebooting climate action through the Paris Agreement is going to be critical. But specifically, what's going to be important is, given 2/3 of those living in rural poverty in Africa are farmers. And just given, as President Gilbert outlined, just given how not only are these farmers bearing the brunt of climate change, but also their significance to any real reduction in emissions over the coming decades. Making sure that this year is also a year of action for farmers on the front lines is going to be critical. As you mentioned, we've seen global citizens over the last 12 months tweeting, emailing, petition, calling their governments, asking their governments to double their ambition to support IFAD's 12th replenishment campaign so that IFAD can in turn double its impact. And we've seen leaders stepping up. Just last week, we had a great meeting with President Macron of France, and he pledged that his country will increase its support to IFAD by 50%. but we need other countries to step up as well. Other G7 nations, including the United Kingdom and the United States of America. We have to give them permission to spend what is in the end our money. And so we'll be asking global citizens to step it up so that their governments can step it up too.
Brilliant. President Hongbo, let me turn to you one more time. So how is the ASAP Plus program of IFAD helping farmers grapple with this first wave of climate impact? And can the solutions that are already there be scaled?
In 2012, IFAD decided to launch this pilot initiative, the Adaptation for the Smallholders program, ASAP. And it turned out quickly. Quite frankly, we were even a bit surprised. Very, 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 very popular because the demand was so high, and because we didn't have specific program focused on the adaptation for the small scale producers. So this year, in the context of IFAD 12, what we are doing is to launch the ASAP Plus. So in addition to what we have been doing, we have been really focusing on water harvesting, training the small scale producers for much more sustainable practices in terms of farming. So now we want to step it up. In addition to the climate service, we really want to also offer natural resource management and governance, the women empowerment, the carbon sequestrations, and a lot of the nature-based solutions to make sure that they are better prepared, and also doing so across the line, dealing with the resilience as part of also the solution. But of course, with the work that others are doing, and I want to highlight the work that GCF is doing, and the financing that they are providing is huge on that. So that makes me quite very, very, very optimistic.
That's good to hear. We all have every reason to be optimistic. I would like to thank you all for joining me, because many of the solutions that we have heard today offer inspiring visions of how, and with the right investments, we can actually save lives and livelihoods whilst protecting the planet.
Now our journey brings us to the theme of digital tools and services, which play a critical role in tackling the climate impacts that threaten agri-food systems. To lead us on this topic, let me introduce our next speaker, Peter Bakker, who is CEO and President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. This global organization brings together more than 200 leading businesses to accelerate our transition to a sustainable world. Throughout 2020, the Council was a key partner in developing an investment blueprint for digital climate advisory services. Their aim is to increase the climate resilience of 300 million smallholders by the year 2030. They work in partnership with more than 40 other organizations, including the World Food Programme, Columbia University, the World Resources Institute, and the Global Center on Adaptation. Mr. Bakker, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Over to you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Thanks all for attending this panel. We're going to talk about facilitating digital climate advisory services to smallhold farmers. We all know that the food system is in dire need of a transformation. We all know that farming will be threatened by climate risks. But what are we going to do to reach out to the smallhold farmers, the many hundreds of millions of smallhold farmers, to make sure that they are part of this journey? So before I introduce my panelists today, let me say a few words to put it into context. I think digital climate advisory services, or DCAS as it's called in the trade, will play a vital role into making farmers and business more adept to the changing climate environment that threaten today's and tomorrow's agri-food systems. But if we're honest about it, the reach and the scale into markets is still limited. The improvements in technology are there. The growing number of initiatives that are globally providing these type of solutions are also there, but we do not yet have the scale and the reach into the farmers community. So just to put some numbers on it, only 10% of smallhold farmers in Africa are registered with DCAS. But if we look into that small percentage, then it's clear that even a smaller percentage of those farmers actually use these types of tools. Challenge will include the lack of standards and regulations around DCAS, leading to poor quality solutions entering the markets, gaps in mobile connectivity, and then of course always the same last mile engagement challenges remain. So to meet these challenges and the need of millions of smallhold farmers, and again, it will be critical that we reach 300 million smallhold farmers to really make the agri-system more sustainable and more resilient to climate change. We need to now really scale up the investments in an unprecedented way. It will need to be guided by principles to ensure equitable access and financial sustainability, obviously. Business has a critical role to play here, given the opportunities and returns that are offered to us by DCAS. It's calculated that the adoption of these type of digital technologies will, in agriculture and rural areas, generate up to 800 billion of value by 2050. Specifically, the digital advisory services bundled together with financial and other services have the potential to increase smallholders' income, which is a critical part in the fight against inequality, by 57%, and productivity even up 168%. So stronger public and private services partnerships will be necessary to create the right enabling environment and to make sure that DCAS is effective and will remain sustainable. To make the case for increased private and public collaboration and investment in digital climate advisory services, my organization, WBCSD, had the great opportunity to join forces with the World Food Programme, the World Resource Institute, Columbia University, and the Global Center on Adaptation in creating the investment blueprint for digital climate advisory services. This blueprint is a document that will detail the investments that are required in DCAS to support the resilience of those 300 million farmers, calling for billions of investments to be delivered in the next decade. And it also lays out the principles that should guide that investment. The blueprint itself will be published in the spring of 2021. So let's move over to our first panelist, which is a video message by Patrick Verkooyen, the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation. Patrick will explain how the Global Center of Adaptation, as a global and regional broker for solutions, sees its role in driving applications of DCAS, and will talk on the implementation of the blueprint. So if you would be so kind to start the video now. Thank you.
Digitalization has the potential to transform the agriculture sector in developing countries. But doing so will require further innovation and strong partnerships between governments, businesses, and farmers, as well as the regulatory environment to ensure that technology remains affordable and accessible. Working with the African Development Bank, the GCA will scale up access to climate-smart digital technologies and associated data-driven agriculture and financial services to reach over 30 million agriculture producers by 2025. The investment blueprint for digital climate advisory services, which we developed with a range of partners, will lay the groundwork to ensure over 250 million African producers can be reached in ways that benefit all those involved. We will work closely with international partners, national governments, and technical partners. Starting with a proof of concept in Ethiopia, we will target all aspects of the digital ecosystem needed to drive effective uses by millions. Through developing and implementing policy frameworks, we will unlock critical institutional bottlenecks and work to mobilize capital and investments through de-risking. We will develop the human capacity needed to take up the technologies. Our approach is a pro-poor one by driving the availability of infrastructure and enabling conditions in regions that are remote vulnerable and poor to ensure no one is left behind. By increasing yields, we project that this initiative alone can eliminate malnutrition for up to 10 million people. GCA and the African Development Bank cannot do this without the support of our partners, including the Ethiopian government, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, represented here today. Collaboration is crucial. We are eager to work even more closely together on this vital agenda to further advance the integration of digital into agriculture for productive and resilient food systems.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's a great speech, and we look forward to collaborate to make this a reality soon. If the virtual technologies work properly today, I'm now going to invite Mr. Parmesh Shah, Global Lead for Rural Livelihoods and Agricultural Jobs, Agriculture at the World Bank, to join me, and I see you on screen. Welcome. I hope you're not in Washington, D.C., because then it's still very early for you, but looking at the light, that's not the case. The World Bank has also invested a great deal in hydromet infrastructure, digital agriculture platforms, climate information services needed to provide the DCAS type of advisory services to smallhold farmers. What is the bank doing to help accelerate the pace of delivering information to farmers? Over to you, Mr. Shah.
Thanks very much. I am in Washington right now, and I'm joining you early morning. World Bank is committed to working on data-driven digital agriculture in Africa and globally. We just now finished a report on scaling up disruptive agriculture technologies in Africa, and we find that Africa is home to many homegrown innovations in digital technologies, building on the interesting work done on M-Pesa and FinTech in Kenya. And we see huge potential in data-driven digital technologies transforming the lives of smallholders. The World Bank has invested in 4 aspects. The first is infrastructure, which is the hydromet infrastructure and also the digital connectivity infrastructure in many countries in Africa. The second part is the data platform. I think without data, digital services cannot be delivered to smallholders. There is a huge need in investing in data platforms, which includes weather data, which includes crop data, transaction data, market data, and other kinds of data, and to be available and accessible to people in a form in which innovators can build on that data as they go on. So we have invested in data centers in many countries so that this data can be available to researchers, innovators, and the people who are developing products and services, and including extension agents at the last mile as well. The second part is developing an innovation ecosystem, which involves hosting a number of innovation challenges and events where it allows a lot of innovative startups in many countries to work with governments and also provide last mile service delivery services. This includes technology companies, startups, agribusiness companies, SMEs, and governments to work together and build an innovation ecosystem. And the work we have done in Kenya on a million farmer platform is an example of that kind, of the kinds of platform we need there. The third investment is in the institutions themselves. I think we need to invest in new kinds of institutions which are data-driven and digitally enabled. This includes bringing more data scientists into government. This includes bringing in digital transformation offices in the government, and also bringing in a number of young professionals to come and work with the government who work on data and digitally enabled services. Finally, our private sector arm, IFC, is developing a new work program of investing in agtech companies and startups which are developing innovations and new ideas. We have a number of new investments coming in, and agtech will become a very important area of investment, which is primarily going to be focused on data-driven and digital technologies. we are trying to build an ecosystem in which every World Bank project in future invests in data, innovation, and also digital technologies as an integral part of investments we do on agriculture and food systems. And we are committed to working with all stakeholders on that. Thank you very much.
Very much, Mr. Shah. Thank you for getting up so early and for giving us insights into the work that you're doing. And I really look forward that once the blueprint is available, we can work closely with the World Bank to help to scale up. So this brings us to the end of this session, but not before I stress how important it is to really work on the scaling up of DCAS. It will equip smallhold farmers around the world to be more resilient and adapt to the challenges of climate change, but it will also allow us to significantly increase the income to those smallhold farmers and therefore contributing to the avoidance of further inequality. Once again, once published, the investment blueprint for DCAS will provide critical guidance to both the public as well as the private sector, and will really be geared towards the many smallhold farmers to scale up the investments into DCAS and to really significantly contribute on the ground in making agriculture more sustainable, more resilient, and adapt to the challenges that we all face. So with that, let me thank all the speakers, let me thank the contributing partners to the blueprint, and let me thank all of you for listening to this session. Thank you.
My thanks to Peter Bakker and our other guests for this discussion on the importance of digital advisory services. Next, we're going to dive deeper into the role of the private sector and the importance of integrating the entire value chain. To talk about these topics, I would like to introduce Fika Sibuzma, board member of Africa Improved Foods, honorary chairman of Royal DSM, and a commissioner for the Global Commission on Adaptation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Highly appreciated. And great to have this summit here together with GCA and together now focus on agriculture in Africa. And seeing Wanjira, Agnes, Peter Bakker, Roger Voorhees, all to be present during this session. Really appreciate it. If we talk about Africa and the vulnerable situation that is there, we need all to come to the conclusion that the vulnerable situation, which is already there, is expanding or continuing. And the current corona crisis, the climate crisis, makes Africa even much more vulnerable in terms of food production. And that is what we can address, what we need to address, including the help of the private sector. And I think we are able to do so. The idea, I think, should be not to help Africa only with food imports and address the hunger and the food that Africa cannot produce themselves. No, to make Africa self-sufficient in their own food production, using their own crops, processing it also locally into healthy nutrition and for the local populations, locally sourced, locally produced, locally consumed. And that is what I think should be the direction. Today, too many people are or having daily shortages of hunger or suffer from hidden hunger, not the right composition of the food. And this we need to address. And therefore we have two great panelists in this first session who can say something more on that, and then I will try to take some conclusions of that. First, I would like to go to Professor Amadi Idi Baga, the Principal Secretary of the State Department for Agricultural Research of the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock and Fisheries in Kenya. And very important, sir, to get your vision, and especially how can we also in Kenya make Kenya self-supporting, resilient to climate change in our own food production. Professor Amadi, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to present
the perspectives from Kenya. For Kenya, agriculture is key to the economy, contributing about 31% to the GDP directly, and also indirectly about 27%. So you see, when agriculture suffers for whatever reason, the economy suffers and pushes people into poverty. Most of the employment also comes from agriculture, accounting for about 40% of the employment. And most of our agriculture is still largely subsistence agriculture, really vulnerable to the vagaries of weather and pests. And we are trying through change of policy to modernize our agriculture and make it commercial agriculture. And to do this, we came up with a strategy, which is the Agriculture Sector Transformation and Growth Strategy, which focuses on the smallholder farmer, also attempts to bring in agro-processing and large-scale farming, and also builds in the aspect of household resilience. So our main goal in the Ministry of Agriculture, as we try to commercialize our agriculture, is to make sure that the incomes and livelihoods of smallholder farmers are improved. Smallholder farmers account for almost 80 to 90% of the farming communities in Kenya, and they drive our agriculture. But we have a small population of large-scale farmers, mainly dealing with the large staple crops or large production of horticultural crops. But the backbone of our agriculture is on the backs of the smallholder farmers. And so we are working with the smallholder farmer through support by various stakeholders to create an ecosystem that will make the smallholder farmer to thrive and earn more. And I think in order for us to be able to do this, we have embraced digitization so that we register the farmers and support them through an ecosystem of service providers. Despite the fact that our economy is still developing, we have a very robust digital sector, and most of the government programs that are linking to farmers are being shifted now from analog to digital. And the ministry has developed a digitization strategy to be able to do that. For example, we have changed our subsidy program for fertilizer, and now we have embraced e-voucher, whereby the farmer is able to access a range of services after being registered. And of course, this requires collaboration with the banks and the ICT service provider companies like Safaricom, and of course the government, and of course the sub-regional governments at the county level. Of course, His Excellency the President has had a clear focus on the 100% food and nutrition security, and the challenges of increasing production, but also the production of nutritious food. So in the ministry, we have elaborate programs of crop diversification, and we have also developed a nutrition action plan, especially in the ASAL areas. These are arid and semi-arid areas of the north, where pastoralist communities are always on the move. In our tracking, we see these areas as very vulnerable, where most of the children under 5 are malnourished, leading to issues of hidden hunger. And so some of our interventions with development partners and our own programs have been geared towards diversification, a way to add to the pastoral livelihood the growing of crops. And most of the time we try to introduce local indigenous crops which are suited to those climates, and trying to commercialize them. And because in the pastoral community, those who are on the move are mostly men, the women are a good entry point for this change in crop diversification, so that families can have nutritious foods. And within the ministry and working with the Ministry of Health, we are making sure that the nutrition sensitive messages and nutrition sensitive agriculture is practiced. And during the time of COVID, in anticipation of the fact that we were going to have probably a food security situation, we also introduced vegetable gardens, these kitchen gardens across the country, to enable families to cope, as most of them were also losing their livelihoods due to the COVID challenge. In the ministry, in response to the climate issues, we have programs supported by World Bank and the African Development Bank that are focused on climate smart agriculture, so that people are able to cope and adapt and practice sustainable agriculture. We have also a clear push for conservation agriculture, so that we move away from agricultural practices that are destroying the environment. And we are working with different development partners to make sure that the communities are able to shift and to adapt to this new reality. But of course, occasionally, like right now, I'm out in Marsabit, tracking the locusts. We for the last 2 years, we have had locust invasions on top of the COVID pandemic. So as a country, working with development partners and technical agencies like FAO and IFAD, we are able to shift our attention, and we're able to respond to climate, but also to pests. And we are learning to adapt also for the long term, and we are pulling the country along. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Boba. And you focus very much on the smallholders. You help them with technology, digitization, which Peter Bakker also talked about, and how we can benefit more in Kenya via technology, interacting with the smallholders to increase the food production in Kenya. I think it's a very good approach and example. I would like to build on that with somebody else, Mauricio Haddad, who is the president of Royal DSM into Latin America, and also involved also together with me as chairman of the Africa Improved Foods, also dealing with smallholders from the private sector and how to benefit that in Rwanda and beyond. Mauricio Haddad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Faike, and a great opportunity for us to share a bit what has been our experience with Africa Improved Foods and the way that we want to move forward. Africa Improved Foods is a social enterprise producing affordable food using raw materials from Africa. The company has revenue today of around $50 million US, producing 50,000 fortified cereals each year, enough to provide a meal of one for 1.6 million consumers. AIF addresses climate change by building climate resilient food systems, and of course by reducing uncertainty and volatility in African food value chains, and including climate risk in its business planning. It's offering consumers nutritious, aspirational, affordable, and accessible products. It is a public-private partnership launched in Rwanda in 2016 to combat malnutrition, while at the same time improving the local economy and resilience of its agricultural value chains. It's focused on inclusive local sourcing and developing robust value chains that are capable of quickly adapting to climate change. AIF Rwanda has already enabled 130,000 smallholder farmers to become more climate resilient, created more than 300 direct jobs, and contributed 1 billion discounted net incremental value in East Africa. So going forward, we aim to invest around $300 million to scale significantly with the aim of improving the nutrition for more than 100 million African consumers and bringing to more than 2 million smallholder farmers into climate resilient and stable value chains, improving income and livelihoods for farmers and food safety and security for Africa. We will do this based in our experience in Rwanda. Africa Improved Foods Royal DSM and Global Center of Adaptation aim to drive the resilience of farmers and food value chains through the revitalization of markets and to the introduction of adaptation interventions. For this, we'll develop a replicable and scalable blueprint, and this blueprint, will include some aspects like stabilizing demand for agricultural supplies and thereby reducing price volatility for both farmer and agro-processors, stable and reliable demand for products or smallholder farmers at a fair price to improve their livelihoods and creditworthiness. Farming practices and value chains are enhanced for climate resilience, investments to reducing weather dependency, and yield increases will reduce the need for land, gives ability to restore natural landscapes, biodiversity, and create the carbon sinks. We need to offer the farmers tools. As the next step, we aim to build a system that creates resilience around the biggest staples crops that we have in the countries in Africa, supporting farmers to move to more climate resilient crops may prove to be a better option for other farmers and other regions. Together, with stable, fair prices, AIF will allow farmers to invest in their resilient futures. This could strengthen and adapt components of Kenya's, for instance, national and regional food systems. And this will support rural development and wider food security, save lives, and establish preconditions for peace and sustainable development and prosperity. For this, collaboration is absolutely key. We have learned from our partners in the JV that it requires coordinated efforts, food and agricultural systems. We look forward to collaborating with the ministry and other stakeholders in Kenya. It's time to act, Feike. We cannot wait anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mauricio, and thank you very much for your effort you do in this field, showing also that the private sector and its involvement can really help countries to become more resilient against climate change, to become more resilient for its own food production, to make its own food locally via local sourcing, local production for the local population, and not dependent from help from the rest of the world. And I think that is, what we need. And I really admire the way you do that, Mauricio, with DSM in Rwanda and now beyond in Ethiopia and Kenya, and fits very much with what Professor Boga also said that Kenya is doing in helping the smallholder farmers to be more effective. Great examples from technology locally on the ground and the private sector, how to help making Africa more resilient. And with that, I go back to you, Lauren, to the studio.
Thank you to Fika and indeed to all of our speakers for that fascinating session on integrating the value chain for resilient agriculture and food systems. It's clear that we need to work together to strengthen our actions and to achieve resilient food supplies for the African continent. Now we will hear some reflections from Dr. Kalibata. Dr. Kalibata, I'd like to pose a question to you. How does the Africa Improved Foods model capture this idea of Africa feeding Africa?
Thank you, Lorraine. And it's good to hear from Feiki and all the other people that talked about the work that is happening with Africa Improved Foods. I was part of working with Feiki to ensure that the Africa Improved Food took off. And one of the things that I really want to underscore here is it requires very determined leadership to get programs like this off the ground. It requires public-private partnerships. And we've seen that leadership of Feiki and in the leadership of the President of Rwanda, in the leadership of the many executive directors of the World Food Programme that participated in this. So, under leadership. But in terms of making it happen for people, the Africa Improved Food idea as a public-private partnership focused on 3 areas. addressing the issue of malnutrition, recognizing fully well that we have 45% across the continent of children that are still not growing as they should and whose future might be compromised because of that. So Africa Improved Food now, its reach is big because of World Food Programme, but also because of access to that is available to countries neighboring Rwanda, Kenya and others that are able to access this and make it available to children. The other bit is what it does for smallholder farmers. Hundreds of smallholder farmers in Rwanda and in the region plant every year, every season, planning to supply African Improved Food. This has done a number of things. It ensures that these farmers are producing so much more than they were producing before because they have a market. So also ensuring that these farmers are thinking about the quality of food. So without planning to, Africa Improved Food has definitely improved the quality of food that is being eaten in these countries across the board. In individual households, the levels of food that have aflatoxins have gone up because the consciousness around aflatoxins, for example, has been built and the governments are putting in place policies to deal with aflatoxins. So in addition to ensuring that smallholder farmers are producing and getting a good price for what they are producing, in addition to ensuring that there's a whole lot of rural farmers that see this as an opportunity, it's become a huge pull factor for them, that see this as an opportunity to engage and participate in a viable business. And in addition to the fact that it offers an opportunity for building and dealing with the challenge of malnutrition, it's created a whole ecosystem of businesses between the farmer and Africa Improved Food itself that really provides opportunities for job employment. And these are not even being counted among the things that we are about. So the opportunity that this type of investments offer, not just as a social enterprise, but as a business opportunity for communities that depend on them, is huge. And my only challenge with FAKE is that we are not doing many more of this across the continent and building many more partnerships that can take the likes of Africa Improved Food to other smallholder farmers in the continent, but also to other communities that need to improve their nutrition across the continent.
Thank you, Dr. Kalibata, for sharing your thoughts. The next session focuses on Germany, the convener country of the Global Commission on Adaptation. We will start with a short video about the special BMZ initiative, One World, No Hunger. We have with us now Dirk Schatzschneider, who is Assistant Director General at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. His department has been engaged in the Commission's Agriculture and Food Security Action Track. Mr. Schatzschneider is also the Commissioner for the BMZ initiative, One World, No Hunger. We also have with us Dr. Martin Frick, who is Deputy to the Special Envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. These snapshots from different countries show how development cooperation is generating impact on the ground, but of course, the challenge is still great. We need to increase the resilience of hundreds of millions of farmers all around the world. So first of all, Mr. Schacht-Schneider, what do you think needs to happen to trigger that transformation? Don't we need a broader strategy to achieve the necessary change in our global systems of food and agriculture?
Oh, well, Lauren, thank you very much. Let me say, first of all, that I'm happy to talk about adaptation in agriculture. This sector has a long tradition in adapting to climate change. Regarding your question, yes, absolutely, we do need a strategy to handle future challenges, and we can learn a lot from the agricultural sector. That's, for example, why we in our ministry are right now drafting a new and I would say ambitious strategy. And we will discuss it with our partners and hopefully have it on the table for the Food System Summit that is upcoming under preparation of Mrs. Kalibata, Martin Frick and her team. Obviously, there are also operational questions and we are involved with our activities of the special initiatives that I am heading in the operations on the ground. We committed to support 60 million people in rural areas to increase their resilience, and we are on a good track to reach that goal. The 220 million yesterday committed by Chancellor Merkel will also pay into that goal. And so I would say, yes, strategy is key, a new global strategy, and also operational efforts that all countries should be committed to. I stop here, and I would expect that Martin will add some points.
Indeed. Dr. Frick, what are your thoughts? What do you think needs to happen to trigger the transformation?
Well, thank you very much. I think the central word really is systems. We need to get smallholder farmers out of this perspective of food producers only. They are at the same time stewards for our ecosystem. They are essential to build livelihoods in their communities because agriculture is still the largest employer on this planet. And I think that's what we are trying to do with this summit, to take this historic commitment of SDG 2. I mean, it is way too little known that one of the central SDGs is really to eradicate hunger. And I think if anything deserves the notion of being historic, that's it. But we need to see food systems as central to the delivery on all sustainable development goals. And as it's a systemic solution, it also needs systemic partnerships to bring the different elements together. We need governments, and I applaud the commitment by the German government to really work with smallholder farmers and eradicate hunger and build resilience. We also need big companies to take responsibility for their value chains and to commit to fair prices in the uptake of products. But we need governments, and part of this Food System Summit is national dialogues in every single government to really create national action plans. And then we need the people on the ground. And, you know, in the spirit of the SDG, the essential bit is to give particularly those people a voice who are normally not heard. Indigenous, landless, women group, you name it, people with disabilities, they need to be at the table. So in short, we really need to bring everybody together to create a solution that works outside silos, horizontally across the board.
Thank you both very much. Dr. Frick, for my next question, I'll stay with you. How can we achieve an agriculture that secures adequate food in a way that is socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable?
Well, I think it starts with looking at smallholder farmers. And I think the two big agenda items on the 2030 agenda is really the environmental and the development side. And we need to bridge both, which means that farmers need to be in diverse, productive food systems. Issues like agroecology, agroforestry, holistic grazing, all of these methodologies are known. But it won't happen if we see smallholders as only dependent from the money they are making by producing food. But if we turn it around, we basically have a workforce of hundreds of millions of people who can help us fighting climate change, fighting the dramatic loss of biodiversity by changing to right production methods. But that again needs rethinking of our diets. We need to think about the trajectories we are on. And so we need to bring these elements together. The health aspects, how do you bring nutritious food to people? How do you make sure that they are resilient against something like the current COVID pandemic? How do they produce in a way that we mimic nature, that we close cycles, that we reduce waste to the maximum, that we reduce inputs? And also on particularly OECD countries side, we need to drastically rethink our food systems to come down with this obscene amount of wasted food, which is produced in highly energy intensive systems only to end up in a trash bin. So again, it's about bringing these issues together.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Mr. Schacht-Schneider, do you have something to add?
No, but I would underline that the Food System Summit, as I also mentioned in my statement, is very useful to bring together the strategic level and, let's say, the operational outcomes and needs that should be implemented after a common strategy has been forged.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'll stick with you, Mr. Schacht-Schneider, for the final question, which is, after all the initiatives we've seen so far, it seems like the solutions are there already. So what we really need is more funding so that we can scale these approaches. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Well, Lauren, money makes a workaround. That's completely true. However, money is not everything. Of course, we need enough funding by all sides, by the way, but we also need to rethink about we organize the financing systems. Redirecting financing that is used for agricultural subsidies up to now only works if governance and capacities are also improved. Here we need the political will and ownership of governments and societies, both in the North and in the global South. And in good framework conditions, also private investors will come in. Martin mentioned that already. It is also required that these private financing institutions have an awareness that they need to link all their investment steps to sustainability criteria. So for a level playing field and fair competition, consumer prices should reflect the external costs according to the polluter pays principle. And so on both sides, government financing, private investors and consumers, we need a change in the mindset.
Thank you very much. Dr. Frick, anything to add?
No, I think it really encompasses that. But just to put things in perspective, BMZ has published the Ceres report. And if you compare the numbers that are necessary to really eradicate hunger with the 12 trillion that are currently mobilized for post-COVID packages, it's almost like the money for the stamps you need to send the letters. It's ridiculously low. And I think if we work together, there's really a historic chance to make zero hunger a reality.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so I'd just like to invite each of you to make a very, very brief final remark. Dr. Frick, would you mind going first, please?
It's very simple. There are many possibilities to engage with the Food System Summit. I would encourage everybody to be a part of that, particularly those with critical views. We need you on board. We want to be a neutral platform for all the discussions that need to happen.
Thank you. And Mr. Schacht-Schneider, a final remark?
Well, I really would underline that from the German point of view, this conference and summit is really appreciated with all the initiatives that were presented yesterday and today. Germany supports all these approaches and includes it in our projects. We will contribute as much as we can in the future tackling of this global problem. And we invite all other partners, like in the past, also in the future, to join forces together with us for a climate resilient and sustainable rural development. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I'm looking forward to following your work and seeing it come to life in the months and years ahead. Now we have a short reflection from Mona Lisa, a youth entrepreneur from Indonesia who is involved in the BMZ project. Mona Lisa, it's a pleasure to meet you. You've been working to support smallholders to create more sustainable products. Based on your experience, what do you think is needed for Germany's One World, No Hunger strategy to be successful? And how can young people like you contribute to the effort?
Thank you, Lauren. Well, we all know that something is wrong with our food systems, and I think we definitely need to have less discussion and push more actions. Well, I'm from Borneo, the third largest island in the world, where you could find all this tropical rainforests. And those rainforests that we call the lungs of the earth are dying. And one of the main reasons is unsustainable agriculture practices. So we need a concrete policy to stop this. We need a new business model that is sustainable and scalable, where the smallholder farmers are the key player. And we need to support those who are working on the ground level to create solutions. And for the young people, we need more support. We need a proper training for us to be an agent of change in our area. That's all from my side. Thank you, Lauren. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mona Lisa. Now we go back to Idris and Sabrina Elba, who will be speaking to the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, in another fireside chat.
It is my pleasure to be joined here in conversation with such a passionate advocate for this mission. So thank you so much, Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this.
My first question is twofold. It really sort of like, in your opinion, what is the most effective way for us to start dealing with some of the challenges with climate? And the second is, why is it important to be thinking about building long-term resilience to these challenges?
Myself, I grew up in a very rural place in Belgium, and I still live there. And there's a lot of agricultural activities, and we see the impact of climate change. The droughts are much longer. When it rains, it is much more intense. We see that farmers are just losing their fertile ground because it's washing away. I think by now everyone is starting to see the impact of climate change. The key challenge that I see is how do we tackle this, and how do we make it possible for everyone, even for small farmers in Belgium, but also small farmers around the world, to handle this. And I think there's two big elements. One of them is technology. Technology will be the solution. The whole question is, how do you make technology accessible to everyone, and how do you speed it up? We don't have the comfort of time. If we want to be able to tackle this, we need to find ways for that technology that is under development, that is ready to be tested, to roll it out on such a massive scale to be able to also have massive effect. Who is going to play a role in this? And my experience as a Minister of Development, and it's also a topic which is really close to my heart, is that gender does play an important role in that. And we see throughout the world that if women get involved, It is just being handled in a different way. And we see that the impact that it can have in giving, for example, farmers a living income, if women are part of this, that income is being used in a much more productive way towards society.
I would be really interested to hear your thoughts on the linkages between how food is being farmed and produced, ending hunger, and also the impacts on health and nutrition, and what you can say about that.
I think that this worldwide crisis to which we are confronted now, some people say this is the end of the global view that we have. I don't agree with that. I think that more than ever we realized how connected we are one with another, and more than ever I think we realize that no one, towards COVID, no one is going to be safe unless everyone is safe. And I think that the link to climate change is actually a very easy one to be made. If we see that certain parts of the world remain in dire misery and in poverty.
What do you think the position for the youth is in the climate adaptation conversation and in agriculture?
First of all, this is about their future. This is the next generation, and they will be confronted to the things that we have not tackled today. I'm convinced that my generation is the first generation that sees the impact of climate change. And we're probably also the last generation that can do something about it. If we don't do it, the generation which is coming after us, they won't be able to tackle it anymore, because it's this exponential evolution that we've seen so often these days in COVID. That exponential evolution, it's exactly the same in climate change. Second reason is that that young generation, they are incredibly entrepreneurial. They're incredibly ambitious. I've seen it for the last 5 years. I've traveled in so many places in Africa, and I've always done such an effort to explain in my home country that young people, they have the same mindset. If they grow up in Boston, or they grow up in Brussels, or they grow up in Kinshasa, they want to do things. They want to do things because they want to improve the environment which they have around them. And the mindset of an entrepreneur is seeing something and saying, this can be done in a better way. As I said, I grew up in an agricultural region. I know no better friends of nature than farmers. Farmers know that their subsistence, their life is dependent on finding a balance with nature. And farmers always have a long-term perspective, because they know that's the only way they can survive.
If you could, give other world leaders a message, considering where we've come from and considering what we know, what would that message be?
Well, I think that more than ever, we all realize that we're in this together, and we're all in this. And we can only go forward if we work together. We humans, we can do tremendous things. We can do amazing things, and that's a choice. And do we get at the table and we bring our problems and we bring our resentment one against another, then we will go down a very slippery path. But if we bring to the table what we're best at, and if you try to get the best out of everyone, we can do amazing things. Look at what we've done in the development of vaccines. I mean, we've done this in 9 months' time. It's amazing what humans can do. And it's amazing what we can do when we're confronted to a crisis. I think COVID has shown us what we can do if we're confronted to a crisis. But there is another crisis. And that climate crisis is as severe as the COVID crisis. And it should be a lesson also for the climate crisis. Let's bring to the table what we're best at, and then we can do amazing things.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. You really are a champion with these issues. So thank you so much for lending us your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for a great conversation, and let's hope that we can get it into action. It's good to talk about it. It's even better to do it.
Before our final remarks, I will hand over to Claudia Sadoff from the CGI-AR Partnership for a last announcement.
Thank you, Lauren, for this opportunity to announce the launch of CGIAR's new research and innovation strategy, which, alongside our ongoing organizational reforms, will help us play our part in addressing the increasingly complex and interconnected challenges we face. Climate is central to our refreshed mission, which is to deliver science and innovation that advance the transformation of food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. And let me tell you why. We all know that the climate crisis poses major risks for agriculture and food production through higher temperatures, erratic rainfall, drought, floods, and sea level rise. And we also know that just as food systems suffer from climate change, they also contribute to climate change. Agriculture and food systems produce almost a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. But imagine if food systems were managed and governed differently. They could be a champion of change. Food systems could lead other sectors with solutions and inspiration for sustainable living. The agricultural sector is at an inflection point, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reset how we work and the scale of our ambitions. Transformation of our food systems is essential. A recent study in the journal Science predicted that even if we stopped burning all fossil fuels right now, it would be impossible to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement without transforming the global food system. Today, a concerted global effort is needed to radically realign food systems around the world. This realignment could contribute not only to climate adaptation and mitigation, but also to gender equality, job creation, prosperous livelihoods, opportunities for youth, environmental health, biodiversity, and an end to hunger and malnutrition in all its forms. As a leader in agricultural research for development, CGIAR is rising to this challenge, guided by this new 10-year research and innovation strategy. Our new strategy puts the climate crisis at the heart of global research on food security for the first time in our 50-year history. This marks a new era, one that brings food and environment together through a systems approach. This strategy is CGIAR's roadmap for impact for the decade leading up to 2030. It's a strategy that addresses the evolving challenges that we face, one that broadens and deepens partnerships, paving the way for more interconnected and partnership-driven research, one that reflects a unified and more impactful CGIAR with integrated capabilities, knowledge, assets, people, and global presence. With this new strategy, we're targeting multiple benefits for climate adaptation and greenhouse gas reduction, alongside 4 other essential impact areas, which are nutrition, health, and food security, poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs, gender equality, youth and social inclusion, and environmental health and biodiversity. I'd like to share with you 3 of the ways in which CGIAR's new strategy will be working to deliver impacts for climate adaptation and mitigation. Firstly, our research aims to transform our agri-food systems to make them more resilient to climate challenges and shocks, and to lower emissions. Through scientific evidence, climate-smart solutions, and innovative finance, CGIAR is contributing to advancing climate action at all geopolitical levels. Secondly, we're developing genetic innovations that enhance crop resilience through traits such as drought tolerance and heat resistance. CGIAR gene banks play a pivotal role here, protecting and mobilizing plant genetic resources crucial for securing healthy diets in a climate-constrained world. And thirdly, we're engaging with key stakeholders to ensure uptake of improved practices and technologies at scale. Our partnerships at every level, from local to global, enable us to understand farmer needs and ensure that CGIAR's research and innovation feed into the critical processes, policies, and incentives that shape agricultural production, land use, landscape restoration, water management, forest conservation, and resilience to droughts and floods. Investment in agriculture has lagged behind other sectors, despite its contribution to human and environmental health. Series 2030's new report suggests that by doubling agricultural investment between now and 2030, we could end hunger, double smallholder farmer incomes, and protect the climate. The potential is tremendous. A study by the SOAR Foundation concluded that investment in CGIAR's research has a 10-to-1 benefit-cost ratio, with the majority of benefits accruing to farmers. A doubling of current investment in CGIAR and our partners' research will ensure that the transformation of food, land, and water systems, urgently needed to tackle the climate crisis, can proceed at scale. This is why I believe that CGIAR's offer is now more relevant than ever. Agriculture must be part of the solution to the climate crisis. And with a new strategy to guide us, CGIAR is rising to the challenge. Thank you, Lauren, and back to you.
We are reaching the end of our time together. We've touched on many different topics during this journey through sustainable agriculture and food security. The need for research and innovation, climate finance, and digital advisory services are all clear. And of course, we must not forget the crucial role of the private sector and the importance of an agro-ecological approach. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Kalibata to make some closing remarks.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for having me again. Let me start by congratulating the CGIAR on launching this strategy and recognizing the centrality of the food systems in the strategy they are launching today, but also the commitment to climate change. We really look forward to working with you all to ensure that this becomes a reality, communities that need to be protected. Throughout this conversation that we've had today, there are a number of things that I want to go back to that characterize the nature of the conversation. The urgency that keeps coming through, the opportunity of our generation that was mentioned by many of you, the fact that already exists, that came through each time. The fact that the imperative around the resources that are needed to do this work is very clear. It's not a question of resources. And as Doug has said, sometimes it's not even about resources. The need for a systems approach and partnerships have all come out very clearly. And if I go just to highlight a few, I really want to appreciate the conversation that happened around demand-driven innovations and the commitment of the World Bank to support the CGIAR in its work and other support countries in ensuring that countries come on climate resilience. On climate financing, there's an imperative around ensuring that rural communities are supported. If you look at the work that IFAD is doing across the world, I personally have been part of seeing what IFAD does on the ground. And I can tell you, there's no institution that is touching rural communities, private sector at local level than IFAD does. And I think it's very clear, it came out very clearly that doubling down on ensuring that this institution is funded to continue reaching rural communities is very critical. I particularly want to note the effort and the work that is being done by the global citizen to mobilize resources for IFAD. Like as a beneficiary, the communities that I represent are beneficiaries of the work of IFAD. And I just wanted to reiterate that we can't do a better job than supporting this institution to doing very well. On digital innovation and services that was brought, Peter talked about reaching 300 million farmers and ensuring that these farmers can adapt to climate change and have a good livelihood. And I want to link Peter's discussion around digital to actually the discussion around that Doug put forward when he was talking about 60 million farmers they are reaching, and I'll come back to that in a second. But in the meantime, I want to recognize the place and role of public-private partnerships to drive to that is, and the fact that they follow.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much to Dr. Kalibata, and apologies for the slight technical hitch there. Thank you also to all of the speakers who have been featured today in our agriculture and food security session. You're watching the Climate Adaptation Summit, and wherever you are in the world, I'd like to thank you for being here with us too. The closing session of the conference will begin at 12 p.m. Central European Time. Goodbye.